to promote progress toward both our maximum employment and 2% inflation goals.
And recession fears have caused investors to flee to safe investments like
U.S. Treasury bonds are a pretty safe investment.
Nothing can touch them.
Let's get one thing straight. Not all debt is evil. In fact, the right kind of debt is one of the most powerful tools the wealthy use to multiply their money, while the middle class often treats every loan like a trap. This distinction is one of the biggest reasons why some people accumulate massive wealth and others remain stuck paycheck to paycheck despite working just as hard. By the end of this, you'll see debt not as a liability to fear, but as a strategic lever that can accelerate wealth, if used correctly. Most middle-class families think of debt as something to avoid at all costs. Credit cards, mortgages, car loans, student loans, anything borrowed is dangerous. And in a sense, they're right. Mismanaged debt can destroy your finances. But the wealthy approach debt differently. They see it as a tool, a form of leverage. They borrow not for consumption, but for investment. The principle is simple. Use other people's money to acquire assets that generate income or appreciate in value. That's where the middle class and the rich diverge in philosophy. Take a mortgage as an example. The middle class often buys a home that stretches their budget, paying off every dollar as if it's a personal burden. Meanwhile, the wealthy use real estate loans strategically. They buy properties that generate cash flow exceeding the cost of the loan. The property pays for itself, and over time, appreciates in value. Meanwhile, they can reinvest their own capital into additional assets, instead of locking it all into a single house. One property financed intelligently can become a stepping stone to a portfolio of income-generating real estate, all fueled by borrowed money. This principle extends far beyond real estate. Businesses are another area where debt becomes a supercharger. Middle-class entrepreneurs often bootstrap their ventures, funding growth strictly from personal savings. The wealthy, on the other hand, leverage debt to scale quickly. They take loans or secure lines of credit to invest in inventory, technology, or marketing, generating returns far greater than the cost of borrowing. The difference is not risk, it's strategy. Borrowing money without a plan is dangerous. Borrowing money to acquire income-producing assets is wealth creation. Credit cards illustrate another divide. Most people use them to spend on lifestyle, dinners, vacations, gadgets. The wealthy sometimes use them as a bridge for cash flow management or for rewards, but never as a permanent financial crutch. They pay off balances strategically, ensuring that the borrowed money is invested in opportunities that return more than the interest they pay. Meanwhile, the middle class often falls into the trap of high-interest debt that compounds against them, turning small luxuries into long-term burdens. Here's where mindset plays a critical role. The middle class views debt emotionally. They fear it and avoid it. The wealthy view debt logically. They analyze risk, return, and timing. They understand the cost of capital and make calculated decisions. They borrow for assets that increase in value, not for liabilities that depreciate. The fundamental question is always, will this debt generate more than it costs? If yes, it's a tool. If not, it's a trap. Let's take a closer look at leveraged real estate, because it's one of the clearest examples of using debt to build wealth. A middle-class person might buy a $300,000 home, paying $60,000 down and $1,500 a month in mortgage, taxes, and insurance. It's primarily a consumption asset. They live there and hope it appreciates. The wealthy, by contrast, might buy the same home with a similar down payment, but structure it as a rental property. They ensure rent covers the mortgage and expenses, creating positive cash flow. Over 10-20 years, the property appreciates. The tenant essentially pays down the mortgage, and the investor can reinvest equity into additional properties, all financed with debt. That's compounding with leverage. Business financing works similarly. The middle class often starts a business cautiously, funding small expansions with personal savings. If cash flow dries up, they fail. Wealthy entrepreneurs take calculated risks, using loans to hire employees, buy equipment, or invest in marketing campaigns that generate exponential returns. A $50,000 loan, managed intelligently, can grow into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. The leverage multiplies returns far beyond what personal capital alone could achieve. But debt is not without danger, and the wealthy know it. That's why they are disciplined about interest rates, repayment schedules, and asset quality. They rarely take on debt they cannot service. They understand liquidity, stress test scenarios, and maintain reserve capital. The middle class often ignores these principles, borrowing casually and assuming that income will always cover obligations. When markets shift or unexpected expenses occur, high-interest debt can spiral out of control. Debt also allows the rich to accelerate the compounding effect. Let's say someone has $100,000 to invest. They could invest it all in a single asset. Or they could invest $50,000, borrow $50,000 at a low interest rate, and control $100,000. If the asset appreciates by 10%, the leveraged return is greater than the unleveraged return, minus the cost of borrowing. Over multiple cycles, this strategy multiplies wealth faster than cash-only investing. Timing, risk assessment, and discipline are key. The wealthy also know that debt can be tax-advantaged. Mortgage interest, business loans, and investment loans can be deducted or offset against income, lowering the effective cost of borrowing. Middle-class households often overlook these opportunities because they see debt purely as a burden rather than a tool. Understanding the intersection of debt, taxes, and assets is what allows the rich to optimize wealth-building strategies. One of the most underrated benefits of using debt strategically is scalability. Personal savings are finite. Debt is expandable. If you want to grow a real estate portfolio, launch a business, or invest in a high-return opportunity, relying solely on cash limits your growth rate. Borrowing intelligently allows you to scale faster, capture opportunities, and create multiple streams of income that compound over time. Without debt, most people are forced to grow slowly, missing out on exponential wealth accumulation. Now, let's address the fear factor. Debt is intimidating, especially for those taught that all borrowing is bad. But the wealthy mitigate fear through knowledge, systems, and planning. They understand their cash flow, maintain financial buffers, and structure debt so it serves them rather than enslaves them. Fear of debt without understanding leads to missed opportunities, an invisible tax on potential wealth. In 2006, opportunities to use debt strategically are broader than ever. Low-interest loans, microloans, online business financing, real estate mortgages, margin trading, and even peer-to-peer lending provide leverage that was inaccessible to most a decade ago. The principle remains the same. Borrow to invest, not to consume. When executed wisely, debt becomes a wealth accelerator rather than a financial burden. Let's summarize why the wealthy use debt while the middle class avoids it. Leverage amplifies returns. Borrowing allows control of more capital than personal savings alone. Cash flow management. Loans can fund assets that generate ongoing income. Tax efficiency. Strategic debt can reduce tax obligations. Scalability debt allows exponential growth that cash alone cannot achieve. Compounding acceleration, leveraged investments compound faster over time. Access to opportunities. Debt provides capital to seize high-return investments when they appear. Risk management through strategy, calculated borrowing, asset selection, and liquidity planning reduce default risk. Most people never reach the level of wealth where these principles matter because they avoid debt entirely. They prioritize security and avoidance over growth and leverage. The rich, by contrast, understand that controlled, intelligent debt multiplies possibilities. They build portfolios, businesses, and investments that grow far faster than income alone could. Finally, debt is a tool for generational wealth. When used correctly, it allows accumulation of assets that pass down, creating financial security for future generations. Real estate, businesses, and investments financed strategically can compound over decades, generating streams of income that outlast the original borrower. The middle class often accumulates little beyond personal consumption, leaving future generations with limited resources. The lesson is clear. Avoiding debt outright keeps you safe, but limits wealth potential. Using debt strategically accelerates growth, amplifies returns, and allows access to opportunities that cash alone cannot. It requires education, discipline, and a mindset shift, from seeing debt as fear to seeing it as a tool for leverage. To escape mediocrity, stop fearing debt and start understanding it. Analyze opportunities, calculate risks, and use borrowed capital to acquire assets that generate income, appreciate, and compound over time. Debt, when wielded intelligently, isn't a burden. It's a supercharger for wealth. And that's exactly how the rich keep getting richer, while the middle class remains trapped in a cycle of working harder for finite income. The choice is yours. Continue avoiding debt, trading time for money and limiting growth, or learn to use it strategically, leverage assets, and build wealth that compounds far beyond what your paycheck alone could ever achieve. The difference is not luck, it's knowledge, mindset, and execution.